And we're back with another episode of the Troglodyne vlog. So this time I'm going to give you a quick update on what we've been up to for the last week. We haven't been making many videos, and that's because I've been very busy with this new Perl module I've been working on, Playwright Perl, which, to recap from the last video, is going to be a Perl wrapper around the Playwright API, which is a browser automation and testing framework essentially from Microsoft, because, well, Selenium and WC3 WebDriver have just proven to be a total disaster. And anyways, let's just jump right in and talk about the changes since the last video. Basically, the state it was last time was essentially just a prototype to make sure I really understood the API and so forth. And now it is very much so just a very thin wrapper around the actual API. You can see here in the Perl module itself, the usual Perl boilerplate. We've actually got pod now, and that's nice. And it's basically telling you in the description that all of the classes here are going to correspond exactly to the API reference here on the Playwright site. You can see here there's the things like element handles, frames, pages, browsers, etc., right? So that would sort of correspond to, if I have a browser, it's now a Playwright browser. If I have that for a element handle, it's a Playwright : element handle, etc. So beyond that, there were a few different things from the actual API, some deviations we do have to document here. The $, the double dollar, the $eval, $dollar eval, those are renamed to select multi, eval, and eval multi, respectively. And that's because in Perl, if you're not aware, you can't actually name a function starting with a sigil. It's just not going to work because that's the way that we refer to things in Perl. And anyways, so you can see the constructor here is not actually particularly important, but the begin block actually is. The reason that is we needed to have good performance when we're loading up the API.json, which is the specification for the Playwright API, and I only wanted to do that once, right? Don't want to do that multiple times or have to do a check that the data structure is there. It's much easier to just do it one time and pass it around. So we grab that, we read it, and then basically for every different class inside of that spec, we go ahead and we tell ourselves how we make a new object of that, and then stash that in a internal spec that we then use install sub to mangle the stash into magicking up these classes that don't actually have any class files. And so that's a very lightweight in that it literally doesn't have any files. The only file that's relevant is this Playwright base here that you can see I've turned it into an ISA relationship there. So after that, the only other deviations are we've got a launch method, which you got to have an entry point somewhere into every API. So that's what I did. I made a custom URL inside of the actual server, which allows us to launch browsers and so forth. That might not be the very best way to go about it. It might be nicer to have it to where it goes through the normal command API, but we'll see what we have to do going from there if I can clean that up a bit in the future. Anyways, so aside from that, the quit and destroy and the starting up the server and spinning it down is all pretty much the same. I'll go over the actual changes to the server itself here in a bit, but I want to show you the actual base class for the Playwright subclasses themselves. Basically, it is nothing but a little wrapper that says, here's the inputs. It's going to take a type and ID and a spec argument, which, like I said, we're passing that in. But the type and ID are really the only things that matter, because those are the things that we actually get back from the Playwright server that tell us this is something we can actually interact with. And I've got a big hash table of everything that basically we ever interact with. I'm just keeping a copy of that so that we can then fiddle around with it with all these methods that are defined on these new subclasses. So from there, we then make sure that the relevant subroutines from the spec are installed on each of these subclasses, and then we move on. And basically, all we have to do from there is do the request handling. And as you can see, I had to do a little bit of handling for arrayed arguments versus normal arguments, and versus just good old-fashioned strings, numbers, and bools, and stuff like that. One of the questions that I've kind of got is I need to coerce obvious Boolean values, because otherwise you're going to have to pass JSON PP true or false, which is really a pain in the neck. But that's going to require me to actually do a good deal of work to modify the API specs such that I know which order the arguments are in for me to actually do that. And that'll be probably a utility script that ends up in the repository sometime soon. So we can go back here to Playwright. Like I said, we've got a util module here, and that's just common methods. It's basically just my request handler, and probably going to be something else before too long. But let's jump back into the base here. You can see here's where the api.json is. In case I didn't mention that earlier, I basically just lifted it from the Python interface. And so in the bin, we have our playwright.js, which is the actual server that we're proxying these requests to Playwright through. And we've changed the arguments that are coming into it to where basically it's just a debug and a port option, and that's really all you're going to get. We're choosing a random port whenever we start it up, and now you're going to, in your session URL, which is this thing, the entry point I was talking about, basically you're just going to then tell it what browser you want, and it'll give you a browser, and you should be good to go. And then from there, the command URL is now a post so that we can send complex payloads and so forth without mangling them. And then it's just a matter of storing this in this objects hash here that we have, and making sure that we can reference all of those results further down the line whenever we make an object in Perl based on those things. And so other than that, it's the same thing with regard to shutdown. It just kills the process and we move on. So it's all a very straightforward sort of thing. I see a lot of potential here. I'm not sure if the upstream Playwright has anything like a grid server capability, and building a proxy server like this makes it obvious how you would actually implement something like that. So if I want to do the sort of Selenium server, I'm going to have to re-implement grid server stuff too, but that means that now I've got a Playwright grid too, so it's extra useful, right? So there's certainly going to be some opportunities, I think, for Troglodyne going forward in those regards. So we will see how that works out, and I'll give you all probably another update next week on how the module is going, and hopefully by then it'll be on CPAN. So let's give us a quick update here with regard to the actual example. So in the top level of the example Perl library, it's just example.pl. So now it's actually launching a browser. I don't have to do anything special. I don't have to have a server up, and it can actually type into stuff and show that. Let's go take a look real quick inside of example.pl. Actually, it'll be easier to open it up here. It's going to be better highlighting for you on the video. So as you can see, we're having to use JSON PP to actually tell it to launch not headless. But it's just you tell it what type of browser you want, and you go from there. It's pretty well documented. You then have to open a new page within that, and if you want to get a context so that you can grab cookies, you can get that from the context method, which is, again, documented on the Playwright site. And then you load a tab, and then you tell it when you want to wait until to actually operate on the page. And I've chosen network idle rather than the default, which I believe is load. And then I'm able to print the status, the browser version, grab the cookies, print those out. I can grab the frames if this is a frame set, which Google.com isn't, so it's just going to give us the main page. And then we run into one of the other bugs that we have right now, which is I'm trying to run some JavaScript, which this theoretically should work, but it's not working, so I'm not quite sure what I need to do. I need to probably consult what the Python module is actually doing to actually make that work. But other than that, we've got, I can do a multi-select like we mentioned with that rewriting of those methods. And it gives me the inputs, and then I can, oh, by the way, yes, we're actually passing the error messages you get from the server directly back to you as a croak now. So you can actually do tries and catches and get the right error message from the server rather than it actually just barfing on your screen there for you. So that's a lot better interface. And then other than that, you can use your normal selectors, you can type into them, and it all works great. So the things that are next is going to be, let's look up the issues here. So as you can see, I've got a little bit of a backlog here. aside from testing and things like that, the things that are probably the stuff I'm going to hit next is going to be the idea of batching requests and doing things that are like inside of a .on. Like say if I want to wait for the page to get an event, which would be like a network idle event or a download complete event, things like that. That way you can batch multiple commands to fire inside of one of those events and for it to actually give you the result that you're looking for, right? So anyways, that's what basically most of these top issues are: console messages, page dialogues, downloads, and the file chooser methods. Those are all essentially the same sort of problem. And then the mouse and keyboard objects and videos and things like that, those are going to be special cases where I probably have to actually implement a class and methods for those specifically. Or I'm going to have to be a little more clever with regard to the way my lightweight wrapper is, in that if it can't find the method, it then looks and sees if there's a class that can possibly be made based on that, because the spec is not exactly going to be telling me that this alias here is, I need a page object for mouse or keyboard or whatever it is. So we'll see how that goes. I probably should have those done sometime this week, both the on listener and the keyboard and mouse stuff. That should be fairly straightforward to take care of. I'm not sure how long it'll take me to figure out the JavaScript, but hopefully I can figure that out before the end of the week. And then I think it's going to be just unit tests and acceptance tests and all that kind of stuff. So we should be good to go from there. All right. Well, cool, man. See y'all later.